present.
Yes. That's what was more fascinating about it than anything.
Yeah, then they give her hell for that. It's like, well, you can't present something like that neutrally. That's like presenting something Hitler said neutrally, or maybe Milo Yiannopoulos.
It's so strange, but what they don't understand, and this is what's really crazy, is that the world is watching, and that most people, maybe it's a 60-40 like we were talking about before when it comes to aggressive women versus aggressive men. I don't know what the number is.
I think it's about 50 to 1, actually. Like, I've been watching the comments on YouTube and so forth, trying to track this. It's like, I think that what the radical leftists are doing is overwhelmingly unrepresentative of the general population. Yes. Overwhelmingly. But they're a very well-organized and verbal and prepared minority. And they've occupied powerful positions in many, many institutions. HR, and one of the things I really can't figure out right now, and for anybody who's running a company that's listening, they should think this through. Like, to let these postmodern neo-Marxists into your company through the guise of human resources is an absolute catastrophe. You're going to pay for that. The ideology that drives postmodern neo-Marxism, this identity politics, the identity politics movement, and its insistence on equality of outcome is a powerfully anti-capitalistic. It's powerfully anti-Western. Why you would let that into your company is so that you can look good socially, let's say, is beyond me. It's a big mistake.
I agree with you, but I don't think people are aware of it. I think part of the problem is this battleground is largely ignored by the general population. I don't think most people are aware of what's going on. You are, because you're deeply embedded in the university system in Canada, and you're obviously now branching out into YouTube and podcasts and all these different ways to get this information out. But the average person that is a CEO of a company, or they're concerned with their own company, they're concerned with their own individual needs, they're concerned with organizing things and keeping their bottom line and making sure.
They're also concerned with looking fair and making sure that they're not prejudiced and all of that, which is laudable. But
I just don't think they see the wave coming.
No, they don't. They don't see it coming. They don't understand it. And they're incautious about it, but they're going to pay for it. Well, Google is a good example, because now Google is in court on the feminist end for like being prejudiced against females, and also on the conservative end for being prejudiced against conservatives. It's like, well, so both camps are after them. And I think, well, why is that? It's like, well, that's what happens when you play identity politics, this tribalism. Now, this is really what I can't stand about identity politics. And I've been warning about the consequences of it on the right wing too, because what I see happening is that as the left, like, let's say the left gets to define the linguistic territory, which was what I was objecting to in Bill C-16. When it came out, I said, look, I'm not going to use these neologisms, Z and Zer, etc., because as far as I'm concerned, they have nothing
people who don't know what you were talking about, there's a bunch of different made-up gender pronouns to describe people in a non-male or female way.
That's right. So there's like 70 different categories of non-binary gender, something like that, generated now. And there's lists of pronouns that hypothetically the people who are in those categories can choose to be addressed by. And now that has the force of law. And so... And I don't care if they choose to be addressed by those pronouns, whatever. That's up to them and whoever else they can convince or ask or entreat or negotiate with. Fine. As soon as it's law, that's a whole different story. Okay, so now I have to use a certain terminology. So then I look at the derivation of the terminology. I say, oh, that's terminology generated by the postmodern neo-Marxists. Oh, well, I think those people are reprehensibly murderous. So guess what? I'm not going to say their words, period. Because I know what they're like. I know where that leads. Okay, so...
But son, most people think that that's a gigantic step to go from saying you don't want to say Z or Zer or any of these made-up gender pronouns to these are murderous people.
Mm-hmm. The ideology is murderous.
The ideology being Marxism.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jesus, how much proof of that do you need?
Right, but that's most people don't understand Marxism. Like when you're saying this, like when you were so adamant about it, I had to start reading about it myself, and I had to start doing a lot of research about it myself. And I think most people hear Marxism and they think socialism.
Yep.
They think pooling all your money together, making things more even for people.
Yeah, like they are in Venezuela. Everybody has an equal chance to starve to death. So you know how the Venezuelan government solved the problem of kids starving to death in hospitals?
How?
They made it illegal for the doctors to report starvation as the cause of death. Right.
Wow.
That's Venezuela in a nutshell. Yeah, everyone's equal there. They all have the same number of bones to gnaw on.
Yeah, that's a horrible thing. But
yeah, it's a horrible thing.
Undeniably. But there's no, like, the connection between gender pronouns and murder. Mm-hmm. It's a big leap.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. Well, that's why you have to look at the underlying ideology, and you think, well, what is the level at which these things should be addressed? Well, is it economic? Is it political?
Or is it the
personal?
beginnings of this ideology, and you understand where the roadmap leads?
Yeah.
You understand the X at the end of the road.
Yeah, right, absolutely. Well, and I think that's why I recommended to people continually to read Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago. So actually, there's a set of books that lay this out perfectly. You read Dostoevsky's wrote a book called The Possessed, or The Devils, and it's a description of the initial breakdown of Orthodox Christian society in Russia in the late 1800s, and the rise of radical socialist ideas. So it's sort of like the prodroma to the Russian Revolution. It's a brilliant book, and it concentrates on the personalities that are involved. And then if you read after that, Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, where he details what he does in that book is quite remarkable. So he says, look, there were tens of millions of people killed from 1919 to 1959 in the Soviet Union, and as a consequence of internal repression. And it's so dreadful that words can't do it justice. I mean, it's absolutely dreadful what happened in the Soviet Union. I mean, just for starters, 6 million Ukrainians died in the 1930s because of enforced starvation. In fact, in the 1930s, here's how terrible it was. So all the food that the collective farmers, newly collectivized farmers, had produced, which wasn't very much, by the way, was taken from them and brought to the cities. So all the farmers starved to death. Now, here's how draconian it got. So let's say you were the mother of some children, and all your grain had been shipped off to the cities, and you thought, well, I'm not going to have my children starve to death. I'm going to go out in the field, and I'm going to, on my hands and knees, and I'm going to pick up the grains that are left over that the harvesters didn't get, and I'm going to feed those to my kids. That was punishable by death. You were supposed to hand in those extra bits of grain so that they could be shipped to the city as well. So that was just the beginning of the fun in the Soviet Union. And what Solzhenitsyn did was say, look, this wasn't a consequence of the Marxist system gone wrong. This was a consequence of the Marxist system. It was an inevitable consequence of the axioms of the Marxist system. And then he lays that out, and it's, well, I think he got it right.
And what is that connection?
Why he won the Nobel Prize.
But what is the connection?
How much tyranny you have to impose in order to produce something like equality of outcome. And Thomas Sowell's talked about this a little bit too. He said, what the people who are agitating for equality of outcome don't understand is that you have to cede so much power to the authorities, to the government, in order to ensure equality of outcome, that a tyranny is inevitable. And that's right. And the another problem with equality of outcome, this is also a big technical problem, is like, well, what measure of outcome? There's lots of outcomes, like how happy are you? How much pain are you in? How healthy are you? How much money do you have? How much opportunity for movement forward do you have? What's the width of your social connections? Like, what's the quality of your friendships? Do you have exposure to art and literature? Like, you can multiply the number of dimensions of evaluation between people innumerably, right? Because there's all sorts of ways to classify people. You're going to get equality of outcome on every one of those measures? Is like everyone going to have to be equally happy in their relationship? And if not, why not? Why stop with why stop with pay? There's no place to stop. So, and that's a huge technical problem. Because there is no place to stop, there will be no stopping. It's like nobody can have anything else. Nobody can have anything that everyone else doesn't have at the same time. That's the ultimate outcome of equality of outcome. Well, you think about what that would mean. It's terrible. Well, instantly you think, oh, well, there's